corrupción, criminalidad y una profunda incompetencia. Señores, eso es lo que define a la administración y a todo este gabinete de Donald Trump. Y bueno, a la mayoría de los MAGA en el Congreso. Señores, hoy ambos fueron destruidos sin piedad por el demócrata Jamie Raskin. Una intervención brutal expuso los actos ilegales por parte de Pam Bondi dentro del Departamento de Justicia. También aprovechó para señalar directamente al presidente de la Cámara, Mike Johnson. Y bueno, ambos tienen que entrar en pánico con mucha razón. Sean bienvenidos a Políticamente en Desacuerdo. Señores, hoy veremos cómo la títere de Trump queda en shock luego de un escándalo ilegal, luego de ser sorprendida violando la ley en el Congreso. Así que los invito a que se queden hasta el final de este video porque veremos los detalles más interesantes. Pues bueno amigos, vamos a irnos directo al grano. Quiero que primero escuchemos al demócrata Jamie Raskin y presten mucha atención a los detalles.
Finally, Chairman Van Drew, and for your opening statement, this week's events show how MAGA has turned American justice completely upside down and inside out. Over the last week, we've been talking about a single rogue DOJ employee who unilaterally canceled more than $500 million in Department of Justice grants to local law enforcement and victims' rights organizations and those assisting the victims of rape and sexual assault across the country. That's what right-wing policies do. I would say to my friend, the chair of the full committee, we tried to restore that money. Nobody seemed to know how any of this happened, but our colleagues didn't utter a word against our amendment, and yet they all voted against it. What else happened? Well, a 33-year-old January 6 rioter who assaulted our police officers at the Capitol, and he smashed the glass pane through which Ashley Babbitt climbed before she was fatally shot by a Capitol officer, was arrested again yesterday. This time they got him for burglarizing neighbors' homes. This was a guy who was pardoned by President Trump, now robbing houses in Virginia. This Zachary Alam was serving an 8-year sentence after a jury convicted him of 7 criminal felonies and 3 misdemeanors when President Trump granted him clemency as part of the mass pardon of 1,600 insurrectionists and rioters for the thousands of crimes committed on that day. At sentencing, U.S. District Court Judge Friedrich described the testimony of police who recalled Alam as, quote, by far the loudest, most combative, and most violent of the January 6 rioters who attacked the police in the part of the Capitol that these officers were defending. And yesterday, the Trump Department of Justice agreed to pay nearly $5 million to the family of Ashley Babbitt, the rioter who tried to storm the House Speaker's lobby on January 6 after she broke into the Capitol and after the aforementioned Mr. Alam broke that window. The Department of Justice originally took the position that her wrongful death lawsuit brought by her family was wholly without merit, no basis, and that Babbitt's civil rights had never been violated by the police, and that the police officer acted reasonably in defense of members of Congress and in defense of Vice President Pence. A Capitol Police investigation cleared the officer involved, saying his actions at the height of the riot, quote, potentially saved members and staff from serious injury and possible death from a large crowd of rioters who had forced their way into the Capitol, into the House chamber, where members and staff were steps away. In 2023, then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said, I think the police officer did his job. Now, although Trump's new attorney general is set to give $5 million to the rioter's family, Trump has not proposed to give a penny to the more than 140 police officers injured, wounded, hospitalized, disfigured, and or disabled in their violence, and nothing to their families. He's proposed no money payments to the bereaved family of Officer Brian Sicknick, an Army veteran with 2 tours abroad who died at age 42 here on January 7th, 2021, the very next day after being brutalized by rioters. The decision to give millions of dollars to the Babbitt family and nothing to the families of the police officers who defended this Capitol, who defended us, exacerbates the insult of Speaker Johnson's continuing refusal to hang a simple plaque in honor of the officers who defended the Capitol and the Congress and the Vice President. A plaque mandated by law and now more than 2 years overdue on the West Front of the Capitol. The Speaker's stubborn refusal to respect the law is craven submission to the executive branch, to Donald Trump, who wants to pretend that the rampaging mob that he sent to Congress was made up of patriotic heroes and that the people he pardoned were, quote, hostages and, quote, political prisoners. A hostage is someone who's been illegally abducted by a terrorist group like Hamas and held for a financial or political ransom. A political prisoner is someone like Alexei Navalny or Nelson Mandela, who's been imprisoned for ideological reasons, not for violently assaulting the police or engaging in seditious conspiracy or destroying federal property. But the administration's effort to create big news yesterday was Trump's acting U.S. attorney in New Jersey, a blatantly partisan prosecutor who has bragged about working to turn New Jersey red. Well, she announced her intention to indict our colleague, Congresswoman LaMonica McIver, on charges of assaulting, resisting, and obstructing law enforcement based on the now famous May 9th incident outside of Delaney Hall, an ICE detention facility in McIver's district, where she was conducting a scheduled oversight visit with other members of Congress, including our 80-year-old colleague, Bonnie Watson-Coleman, and the mayor of Newark. Well, Delaney Hall is operated by the private prison company GEO, a major Republican donor that gave $1 million to Make America Great Again, Inc., and has faced numerous lawsuits for its treatment of detainees and unsafe conditions. The members had a lawful right to be there and to investigate, and even after ICE initiated a scuffle to arrest the mayor of Newark on public property, the House members were let in to tour the facility to conduct nonviolent oversight, and the tour went smoothly. This indictment is a manifest fraud, clearly designed to distract America this week from the administration's savage and unpopular effort to strip 14 million Americans of their Medicaid and health coverage and 11 million Americans of Head Start, Meals on Wheels, and other nutritional assistance programs like SNAP. Representative McIver was, of course, executing one of the core duties of a member of Congress, oversight, pursuant to her precise statutory right to enter and visit an ICE facility. The Supreme Court has repeatedly held that oversight is a central element of the legislative process, because if we can't research the facts on the ground, we don't know what laws to pass. This, for the Department of Justice to charge McIver with assault, is an outrage against the Constitution, which protects members of Congress from civil and criminal prosecution for performance of their core legislative duties. It is also a scandal in light of the DOJ's constant backing of cop-beating insurrectionists, including with the shocking policy that these pardons can even apply to criminal charges wholly unrelated to the events of January 6th, as well as the DOJ's jaw-dropping decision to fire more than a dozen senior criminal prosecutors simply because they had worked on the January 6th case. Yet now we've got colleagues who celebrate January 6th insurrectionists actually calling for prosecution of members of the House for doing their jobs. Representative Buddy Carter called our colleagues rioters. Representative Bishop actually said this was an insurrection. I didn't know that was in his vocabulary, but this was an insurrection, and he said it was a debacle worse than 9/11. No police officers or ICE agents were injured at Delaney Hall. No one died. No one had a heart attack like Officer Fanone did. There were no strokes. There were no broken jaws, no broken necks. Nobody was forced out of police work like Sergeant Gonell was. Yet we've got members of Congress who would gladly jettison the speech and debate clause, which protects all of us in our work, the First Amendment, and the Article I powers of Congress to score a few cheap political points at the expense of their own colleagues. In Trump world, violent insurrectionists and cop-beating extremists are heroes. They're martyrs. They're patriots. Members of Congress performing oversight functions are criminals and insurrectionists. And veteran criminal prosecutors of January 6 felons are fired, so Donald Trump can continue to pander to his private militia of pardoned rioters and insurrectionists and a reserve army of extremists who've proven themselves willing to stand back and stand by. Let me show you what a real assault on police officers looks like. Mr. Chairman, if this is an oversight hearing on ICE and ICE believes a real assault took place in New Jersey, where are they? Why are they not present today? The star of the show is absent, and that, my friends, is no oversight. I yield back. Meantime, I hope they put the plaque up in honor of the police officers who fought tooth and nail to defend Democrats and Republicans in the House and in the Senate on January 6, 2021. There were more than 140 police officers who were wounded, hospitalized, brutalized by a mob that was wielding American flags, Confederate battle flags, Trump flags as weapons. And we voted 3 years ago to put up a plaque in honor of those officers, and that became the law, and it was supposed to be put up a year later, and it's now more than 2 years overdue. And so we want Speaker Johnson to enforce the law.
Ok, señores. Jamie Raskin es simplemente el mejor en este momento haciendo esto. Un líder absoluto, al menos cuando se trata de desenmascarar a los MAGA. Enfrentarlos con argumentos muy claros y contundentes. Nada de rodeos, nada de miedo. Y es una locura que Donald Trump, que durante toda su campaña no paraba de llorar con que Joe Biden estaba utilizando el gobierno como un arma, al Departamento de Justicia, etcétera, etcétera. Y ahora sea él el que esté utilizando cada herramienta de poder estatal para violar la ley, para intimidar, para tratar de encarcelar a sus oponentes políticos. ¿Y qué dicen los de MAGA? Nada, un silencio total. La libertad de expresión que ellos dicen defender, ¿no? En universidades, por ejemplo. Ahora oficialmente, señores, le están pisoteando desde su propio bando. MAGA no tiene principios reales, no creen en la Constitución, no creen en la democracia, solo creen en servirse a sí mismos. Y por eso es que siguen violando la ley, siguen siendo corruptos, siguen siendo los hipócritas más grandes que hemos visto, al menos hasta este nivel de poder. Jamie Raskin tiene toda la razón, ¿no? Mientras Donald Trump organiza actos para supuestamente honrar a policías caídos, lo que realmente está haciendo es utilizar millones de dólares del dinero público para recompensar a gente como lo es a la familia de Ashley Babbitt. Amigos, eso es absurdo. Él no honra a los oficiales que defendieron el Capitolio con su vida el 6 de enero de 2021. Él los ignora, los desprecia. ¿Por qué, amigos? Porque no están dispuestos a cometer delitos por él. Ese es el verdadero rostro de la administración Trump. Recompensar a quienes estén dispuestos a romper la ley por él. Mientras, aprovecha para subir tus impuestos y bajárselos a los multimillonarios. Y bueno, señores, hablemos de otro tema también muy interesante. Y es que hemos visto cómo Donald Trump prácticamente se ha inventado una amenaza internacional solo para poder justificar deportaciones masivas. Hay reportes donde lo demuestran, lo que él intentó hacer. Y lo peor aún, usando informes de inteligencia manipulados. Todo esto tiene que ver con el tema de las deportaciones masivas, con Venezuela, pandillas, deportaciones sin juicio y una alarmante falta de respeto por la verdad y por la ley. En pocas palabras, Donald Trump quiso usar una antigua ley de tiempos de guerra para expulsar a migrantes sin tener un juicio ni tener proceso. Pero como esta ley solo aplica si es que existe una amenaza real de algún país extranjero, como no hubo, tenía que inventarse una. Y ahí es donde entra pues el tema de Venezuela y estas pandillas, ¿no? Que según él estaba siendo dirigido directamente por el gobierno venezolano. El problema, señores, es que la comunidad de inteligencia de Estados Unidos ya había investigado eso y dijeron que era falso. Escuchemos esta noticia.
Joining us now, New York Times Washington correspondent Charlie Savage. He's bylined on the piece, and Ashley Parker and David Frum are still with us. So, Charlie, help us understand what this chief of staff to Tulsi Gabbard was trying to do.
So we're talking about Joe Kent. He's also the pending nominee to lead the National Counterterrorism Center. Right now, he's serving as chief of staff to the Director of National Intelligence. Your viewers may recall in mid-March, Trump issued a proclamation saying he could use the Alien Enemies Act, a wartime deportation law, to summarily expel people from the country without due process and normal immigration hearings. And he used that power to send several hundred men from Venezuela to a notorious prison in El Salvador. And after that, courts have shut down his use of that law for further deportations so far. It emerged after that proclamation that it relied on a key factual assertion by Trump that Venezuela controlled this gang that the intelligence community thought was false. In February, the intelligence community had been asked to look at that issue and had reached the opposite conclusion. Venezuela's government does not control the gang. And that's important because you can only use that law if you're dealing with an invasion by a foreign state. And so gang members coming here of their own accord doesn't do the job to unlock this power. So after the Times had reported on that earlier intelligence assessment, Joe Kent asked the intelligence community, directed them to redo the intelligence, to come up with a different memo, one that would not be used, could not be used against Trump to criticize him for having said this thing that the government actually thinks is false. And then further, when the first draft came in, demanded some rewriting for that purpose and edits. The odd thing about all of this is that second memo is out. It was released under the Freedom of Information Act because Kent had it declassified so that Stephen Miller could use it, which set in motion this chain of events that it became public. And even with the rewriting that he demanded for this apparent, what appears to be, political intervention, the thing still contradicts Trump and still is very bad for the administration. But apparently before these edits, it was more so. We do not know what the pre-edited version looked like.
Charlie, do we have any idea or are there any questions about whether this has been done in other areas of intelligence?
Well, we're only a few months into this administration, so who knows? I don't have an answer to that.
David, after this was released and after there was reporting, or after reporters got a handle on this document showing that the intelligence community did not agree with the assessment, did not have evidence to back up the assessment that the Venezuelan government was directing Tren de Aragua, Tulsi Gabbard fired the intelligence officials who oversaw that memo.
Mm-hmm. And this is all closing around one final and most dangerous possibility, because the people who are involved in rewriting this memo are serving a White House aide, Stephen Miller, who has speculated about repealing habeas corpus altogether over large parts of the country for all people. Everyone, when habeas is gone, anyone can be detained, not just aliens, not just alleged criminal aliens, anyone can be detained.
There's also a polygraph operation, Ashley, from Kristi Noem's DHS to try to suss out anybody that might be talking to reporters, any leak information that they can find. This is all part of a broader agenda, it seems, from the administration to co-opt all of the levers of government under Donald Trump's control. Obviously, they had a hard time with leaks during the first administration. They don't want to deal with that again. But part of the leaking process is not just to embarrass a president, it's to expose potential wrongdoing or things that the administration, any administration, is trying to hide from the public.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. They did have a particularly hard time in the first Trump term. There were these warring factions who, for whatever reason, often found it more effective to get the president's attention by playing out their fights in the media. But the Trump administration, the first one and then this one, is hardly the first president or administration to deal with leaks. And as you point out, Katie, there's all manner of reasons why people share information, including whistleblowers, including people who are deeply concerned by what they are seeing. And it has been striking the level to which this administration this time around is so determined to ferret out these leaks. To give you a more trivial example that I think is telling, here at The Atlantic, my colleague and I published a story about Secretary Doug Burgum at the Department of Interior, how political appointees there were being asked to bake fresh chocolate chip cookies. And we found out later, even there was a leak investigation into how that story came to be. Now, I don't believe it involved polygraphs, but this is something they very deliberately want there to be a chilling effect on people's willingness to go to the media with their concerns.
And Charlie, how has that chilling effect affected the intelligence community?
Well, I think people are very scared, which is the point, of course. And there's been announcements of criminal investigations, including around the reporting on this Venezuelan gang situation. Both a New York Times story and a Washington Post story have been announced as the subject of leak investigations by the Justice Department. That's clearly intended to send a message that people should not talk to reporters even about unclassified information, because they're going to use the tools they can to hunt down people who are putting information out to the public about what's happening inside the government.
What about national security? Is that still the paramount issue here? I mean, when you have the chief of staff directing the intelligence community to rewrite a memo, when you have truth tellers targeted by this administration, I wonder if national security is still the top goal. I mean, obviously it is for the individual agents and individual analysts, but from the administration's point of view, does that send a message, Charlie?
Well, certainly when they're using tools of leak investigations on news stories that do not involve classified information, maybe the chocolate chip cookie thing we just heard was a more extreme version of that, but there's all kinds of ways in which information about what's happening inside the government reaches the American public every day through means other than sanctioned press releases. And to the extent that they are treating ordinary run-of-the-mill disclosures as a threat that needs to be investigated, that certainly does not have a national security hook to it, and looks more just like clamping down and controlling.
Señores, lo que acabamos de escuchar es un intento directo de forzar a los servicios de inteligencia a mentir, solo para respaldar tu narrativa política. Joe Kent, aliado cercano y jefe de gabinete del director de Inteligencia Nacional, presionó para que se reescribiera un informe original. El objetivo de esto es que no se pudiera utilizar en contra de Trump. O sea, en otras palabras, si los datos no te sirven, los cambias. Eso, amigos, es muy peligroso. No solo porque distorsiona la verdad, sino porque socava completamente la función de los servicios de inteligencia, los que se supone que están ahí para proteger tu seguridad nacional, no para proteger la reputación de un presidente. Además, estamos hablando de deportaciones sin debido proceso. Tenemos una base, una narrativa construida sobre una mentira. Hay personas reales que fueron expulsadas violentamente del país porque alguien necesitaba justificar una decisión impopular con hechos alternativos. Y para quienes piensen que todos los del gobierno manipulan cosas así, pueden haber casos grises. Pero amigos, esto no es una matiz política, es un intento directo de utilizar las herramientas del Estado para engañarte, para engañar al público, para ejecutar políticas radicales sin tener un sustento legal. Seguramente algunos dirán, bueno, pero Trump estaba intentando proteger al país. Amigos, proteger a un país no justifica mentir deliberadamente ni utilizar leyes excepcionales sin tener una base real. ¿Qué tan lejos se puede llegar si es que aceptamos que el fin justifica los medios? Hoy se manipula un informe, mañana se encarcela sin juicio. En resumen, esto no va solo de Trump, va de integridad de las instituciones. Si se permite que el poder político manipule a los organismos, que se supone que deberían de equilibrarlo, lo que estamos viendo no es una seguridad nacional, es autoritarismo con traje y corbata. Pero bueno, ¿qué opinan ustedes, señores? ¿Creen que un presidente debería tener el poder de alterar informes de inteligencia para poder justificar sus decisiones? ¿Qué les parece este caso en específico? Los invito a que me dejen sus opiniones en la caja de comentarios. Como siempre, muchísimas gracias por apoyarnos. Regálame un like a este video, compártelo con tus amigos y suscríbete a nuestro canal Políticamente en Desacuerdo. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.